What is going on, guys? So today we're back with another deep dive, and today out of nowhere this Pokemon kind of like took off and kind of took a lead over something that I was actually really looking forward to covering at the later end of this week, but you know, I guess I'm gonna have to push it back to next week. Either way, Ludicolo kind of shot up in popularity recently, so we're gonna actually take a look at this water and grass type Pokemon maxing out at 2323, which is a pretty cool number. With a 0 on attack, 15 defense, and 15 stamina though, at level 24.5, you do hit a 1496, which does actually yield the highest amount of stat product available inside the Great League. Now, we do actually rank, if we take a look at every other possible Pokemon and we rank them by bulk and stat product, we do actually rank 41st in bulk and 35th in stat product, which is actually pretty respectable. It's not amazing, but it's definitely not horrible. And of course, all of this does come from our base stats with a 173 on attack, 176 on defense, and a 190 in stamina. That's actually just flat out pretty good. Now, as we know, most of that is kind of just half of the picture though. If we actually take a look at our moves, we can actually get a better idea of how good Ludicolo actually ends up being. We actually have just a few moves to actually go over today. Bubble and Razor Leaf are pretty much our two fast moves that we have, while we do have Blizzard, Hydro Pump, Solar Beam, and Ice Beam in terms of charge moves. Now, Bubble and Razor Leaf, I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you, I was extremely curious as to which one actually performed better, because a difference in 1.66 energy per turn could make a pretty big difference in terms of which one actually helps more than the other. Now, of course, with Bubble, you are going to get that extra energy per turn, but you are sacrificing a ton of damage. And of course, the trade-off for Razor Leaf is that you do sacrifice all the energy, but you do get a ton more damage in its place. So let's actually put those two in the back of our minds for a second. We're going to talk about our charge moves, and then we're going to go through and actually do some, you know, shielding scenarios about which ones actually work better in terms of our fast moves. So charge move wise, we do have Blizzard, which is 75 energy per turn for 130 damage per turn at a 1.73. Hydro Pump is the exact same thing, except we do get stabbed, so it actually gets boosted to 156 on the damage for a 2.08 on the efficiency. Solar Beam, for 80 energy, we get 150 damage at a 1.88. Now, after stab, we do actually get 180 for a 2.25, which is a pretty insane move if you ask me. Ice Beam though, for 55 energy, we get 90 damage at a 1.64. And out of all those moves, I did try a few different move combinations, and honestly, Ice Beam seems to be pretty much like the go-to move. I think it's basically just because we have a really low energy cost at only 55. It is the cheapest move that we have, but then it kind of comes down to which heavy hitting move do we want? Do we want Blizzard, Hydro Pump, Solar Beam? Which kind of one do we want? Honestly, I saw a lot better numbers when it came to Hydro Pump versus the other two. Blizzard, unfortunately, not having stab does put it pretty far behind in terms of, like, compared to Hydro Pump or even Solar Beam. It puts it kind of far behind in terms of damage, which actually makes its efficiency kind of worse. So Blizzard's kind of easily passed off as like, it's kind of the worst of all those options. It's not a great option, but it's not a bad option either. And then Solar Beam, for that extra 5 energy, do we really get a ton more damage? Yeah, we get 24 more damage out of Solar Beam than we would out of Hydro Pump, but oddly enough, it seems that Hydro Pump actually just makes a tiny bit more consistent, and it ends up working better. We're going to talk about another Pokemon towards the end of this week where the water type move really shows a ton more potential, even though it may have worse stats. I'll kind of give that hint, see if you guys can guess who Friday's deep dive is going to be on. But either way, pretty much the big picture here is that we don't know if we want to go with Bubble or Razor Leaf just yet, but we do know that Hydro Pump and Ice Beam seem to be the most consistent charge moves. With that being said, let's actually put Bubble Beam and Razor Leaf head to head in some shielding scenarios to try to figure out which one actually does perform better. When we take a look at the entire cup, Razor Leaf actually has a 53.6% in that 0 versus 0 shield scenario, while Bubble actually does a 70.3%. Whoa. In the 2 versus 0, Razor Leaf actually puts up a 95.3, while Bubble actually ends up with a 96.9. So far, Bubble has really proved, in the cup at least, that it's actually really good. It does a little bit better in the 2 versus 0, but it does a ton better in the 0 versus 0. But here's kind of where things take a turn, because in the 0 versus 2 we end up with a 47.9 for Razor Leaf with a only 7.8% for Bubble, which is just pretty horrible. Lastly, in the 2 versus 2 we do end up with a 74.5 for Razor Leaf and a 46.4 for Bubble. So it's kind of looking like Razor Leaf actually does better, and if we average all those together, we do actually end up with a better average with 67.825 versus the 5.535 that we have for Bubble. Moving on to the meta scenario though, this is kind of where I think holds a little bit more validity in which move actually does better. Oddly enough, I'm going to say that and then pretty much turn around and break that rule. Either way, in the 0 versus 0, we do actually start out with a 32.4 on Razor Leaf versus a 48.6 with Bubble. In the 1 versus 0, we have a 64.9 versus an 86.5, so Bubble takes it. Then, in the 0 versus 1, we have a 27% for Razor Leaf. And Bubble ends up with literally 10% of that at a 2.7, which is really, really bad. Then we actually end up with the 37.8 in the 1v1 for Razor Leaf with a 29.7 for Bubble. So it's kind of interesting because if we average all those together, Bubble actually does better up against the meta with a 41.875. Yes, I double checked these numbers because that 2.7 seriously I thought was going to throw this off. But it didn't because of that 86.5. Basically, it does really, really well. But Razor Leaf actually ends up with a 40.525. And I think this is one of the only times that I can remember that I'm gonna say this. I actually feel like Razor Leaf would be a more solid choice than Bubble here. So here's the reasoning why. In general, if you look at all of the shield scenarios, not only just from the meta, but in terms of the cup as well, the consistency of Razor Leaf is so much more solid than Bubble. Whenever both players don't have shields, or whenever we have complete shield dominance, Bubble actually does really good. And that's fine, but whenever we both have shields, or whenever we don't have shield dominance, Razor Leaf just really helps us pull out such more better numbers there that it really just makes more sense to go with a more consistent option rather than the classic, like this one does a tad bit better, so we're gonna go with that. I know, I'm breaking my own rule, but it's okay. So if we actually take Razor Leaf, we pair it with Hydro Pump and Ice Beam. That's pretty much the moveset that we're gonna go with for the rest of this video. Now if you remember that 37.8% that we had up against the 1v1 in the meta, we're actually gonna tear that down and actually figure out what exactly is a win and what exactly is a loss. So as far as our wins go, we have Swampert, Whiscash, Quagsire. I could not have foreseen these being at the top of the list. Joke. That's a joke. Then we have Blastoise, Cast Form in its rainy form, Lantern with Water Gun, Lantern with Charge Beam, Sudowoodo, Banette, Lapras, Celio, Kingdra, Haunter, Frostlass. Most of those are pretty self-explanatory. As you can see, there's a ton of water in there, which is to be expected with Razor Leaf. But moving on to our losses, we do have our only tie being up against ourselves. You do see that in the top right hand corner. But as far as our flat out losses go, we do have Glalie, Cast Form in its snowy form, Torkoal, Cast Form in its sunny form, Blaziken, Shelgon, Typhlosion, Drapion with Ice Fang, Dragonair, Sceptile, Ninetale, Skuntank, Meganium, Blossom, Victory Belt, Muck, Charizard with Fire Spin, Venomoth, Gloom, Charizard with Air Slash, Ivysaur, and Venusaur. And to be honest, I can kind of get behind most of those. It's kind of awkward that some of the other Razor Leafers kind of just really dominate us, but it makes okay sense when you think about most of the other Razor Leafers have like a poison type move that they can kind of combat us with, or they may have something else in their arsenal that we actually have a problem with. That's basically the only thing we have is an ice type move to really go up against those, and it just doesn't really help us much. So if we actually break down all those losses that we have and we kind of put those into some categories to figure out what kind of stuff we want to pair with Ludicolo versus what kind of stuff we want to avoid with Ludicolo. One of the first avoidances that I really see is a pretty easy one, the fire type. Even though we do have that unique typing of water and grass, it still does actually pose a problem when we carry Razor Leaf instead of Bubble. And I can probably say that without a doubt, if your problem is more in the fire area, if you're lacking, you know, fire coverage, if you need something to help take out those fire starters or whatever, definitely would consider Bubble over Razor Leaf. But then again, you're giving up a lot of consistency with your Ludicolo, just kind of throwing that out there. But in general, the fire types like Charizard, Ninetales, and Typhlosion give us a ton of problems here, and I think one of the best things to combat that is just a really solid water type. Something like Lantern, Swampert, or Quagsire will do actually tons of work here. Next, in terms of something that really gives us some trouble, are the poison types like I mentioned. So Ivysaur, Muck, or even Victreebel give us a ton of trouble here, and if you can kind of figure out a way to get around those, it really helps. One of the best things that a lot of the poison types have in common is a weakness to fire. Now Muck is going to be a little bit different. You might have to find something that's a little bit more potent towards the Muck or even the Skuntank, but in general, at least something to combat the majority of the poison type users, which are going to be grass. Something that's fire type like Castform in its Sunny Form, Torkoal, or even Blaziken can really help out in a ton of those scenarios. The last category that we do have a big trouble with is the grass types. Like I said, it's kind of awkward, but yeah, most of the grass types give us a big problem here. So Blossom, Meganium, and even Sceptile. Now Sceptile is kind of a unique one because it actually is going to be carrying a bug type fast move with Fury Cutter, so it's a little different, but definitely still a problem, which means that we can kind of carry the poison types, like I said earlier, to really help us out here. Things like Venomoth, Skuntank, or even Venusaur can really help do a ton of work here, which I think is going to help out with Ludicolo's consistency with using Razor Leaf. So that is actually going to be it for Ludicolo today, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for watching. As always, if you want to help dictate what the next deep dive is, of course, you can go down into the description, join the Discord down there, and you can help vote for whatever you want to see. But that should be actually it for today. I'm going to go ahead and record the rest of this week's deep dives, and I will see you again for another deep dive on Wednesday. And see you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Always remember that if you like to like videos, you could do that, but if you don't, you could be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below about the video. I do highly appreciate you guys watching. If you guys want to support me in any way, there are several links down in the description for Patreon, joining the community here on YouTube, or even just directly PayPal if that's your thing. I greatly appreciate everyone's name that's on screen, as you guys have showed some sort of support outside of just viewing the videos, and I thank you guys. You don't understand from the bottom of my heart. So until our next video, guys, I will catch you then.